Yes, thank you very much, Kerry, for speaking with me today about your new book, The Long Goodbye, which I found a very poignant and powerful account of your mother's diagnosis of early onset Alzheimer's. I thought the best way to start is maybe if you could tell me a little bit about the book and what readers can expect from it.
Yeah, sure. So the book is called The Long Goodbye, and it's a story about my mom and my family's journey with Alzheimer's. My mom was diagnosed with early onset Alzheimer's just shy of her 55th birthday, and it was so new to all of us. And from the very beginning, we went through so many different hurdles and learned so much, coming from a place of knowing absolutely nothing about Alzheimer's and specifically early onset Alzheimer's. And I learned so much along the way, and sort of over a 10-year journey, collected so many life lessons and understanding of what Alzheimer's is and what happens to a person who goes through Alzheimer's and how we should treat them and what kind of care they need and the different nuances that a family goes through, what support a family needs. And when my mom did pass away somewhat 10 years after her, beginning of that journey, I felt really compelled to write down everything that I had been through and my family had been through. And I felt like my story, which is actually so many other people's stories that are going through the same experience, could help people along the way. And it was just something that I felt I had to do. One, I wanted my mom's whole experience and my family's experience to mean something. And secondly, I really wanted it to be a resource or something that can educate people about something which unfortunately is going to affect so many more people, and also share in my experience in the hope that it can help others in their own journey.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's a really beautiful reason to actually write the book. And like you said, it is a resource as well as your personal story. I'm interested a little bit in sort of, I guess, the prevalence of Alzheimer's in Australia and I guess if there's a group most at risk.
Yeah, absolutely. So the numbers are pretty grim, unfortunately, but there's around 400,000 Australians that are affected by Alzheimer's or living with Alzheimer's, or let's say dementia in a sense, because dementia is like the umbrella term and Alzheimer's is a form of dementia, and it's the most common form of dementia. Um, it's the second leading cause of death in Australia and the first amongst women. So it's not great. And the numbers are expected to somewhat double by in the 2050s.
Okay.
So unfortunately, there is no cure. And not to say that there never will be a cure, but we haven't gotten closer to a cure. But what we have got closer to is working out how we can delay the onset and what we can do from a preventative point of view in order to, delay the onset if you were someone who was predisposed or was going to potentially develop Alzheimer's. And I think that's something that we have to focus on now, because if we can delay the onset or, delay it all at all, we just stand a much better chance of, living a long and healthy life.
Yeah. Is it an area that you think Australians, knowing your own experience and what your family went through, is this something that you were prepared for or that you think Australians are well equipped to understand?
No, not at all. My family and I were taken by such surprise.
Mm.
What I knew of dementia was that it was an old person's disease. It was something that, your grandparents might get when they're old and they start forgetting things, maybe in their 80s, 90s. I had never heard of early onset Alzheimer's until my mom was diagnosed with it. I had a friend who had a father that had dementia in his 60s, and that just was a rare kind of case that we knew of. But sadly, he didn't live very long and died from other complications. And I think Australia is not equipped for it, because especially early onset, and with early onset occurring to impacting people between the ages of 30 and 60, we just don't know enough, or we haven't known enough about it and how to deal with that when it happens to somebody so young. And I think we do have a long way to go in terms of educating ourselves about dementia, all forms of dementia, and specifically early onset Alzheimer's. And I think we need to start that education from a really young age, because our brain develops and don't quote me on this, but it's somewhere around in our 20s when our brain is like fully developed. So if we're not taking care of our brains, and our health early on, then the impacts of that are going to be seen when we do hit our 40s and 50s and 60s, and in some cases later on. And I guess that presents an opportunity as well, but one that I think we do not need to start taking seriously and putting the onus of our health in our own hands.
Mm. So, Keri, tell me a little bit about your relationship with your mum before the diagnosis of early onset Alzheimer's. Were you close? What was it like?
Yeah, my mom was the ultimate family mum. She lived and breathed for her family. I have two brothers, and she just did everything for us. She was the person that would be at every single sporting practice, every single game. We're a really sporty family, so our after school activities were going to sport practice, and on weekends we were playing matches, and she was there for all of that. She was always that, person who was a phone call away that would do whatever we needed, pick up something from the shops, have lunch ready for us when we got home. Um, she had her own kind of quirkier sense of humor. She wasn't outwardly funny, but she loved to laugh. She was a really sociable person, loved to be with friends and family, loved her Yiddishkeit, was a really big part of her life, having families and doing, Jewish festivals and Friday nights and just being together with her family. My mom and I had a great relationship, and but truthfully, I think I had a closer relationship with my dad, and my brothers had probably a closer relationship with my mom.
Okay.
My mom and I, like, our favorite things to do together would be going shopping. She was definitely my favorite shopping partner, and she was just my biggest supporter, being on the sidelines all the time for anything and everything that I was doing.
Mm. And how did that change, throughout the diagnosis and I guess into the later stages of the disease, which I imagine were very different to how it first presented?
Yeah, it's really difficult because you have this person who you've always looked up to growing up, and even, when we were young adults and living out of home and at university and starting in the workforce, and my mom was always still that person that we could call on
Yeah.
and was just willing to do anything for us. So when she lost the ability to do things and her personality changed and she just wasn't able and capable of all those things that she could do, it was really hard to accept that she was different in a sense to how she had been before. And the person that we would go to for everything and whatever we needed was no longer capable of fulfilling that, for us anymore. So there was a lot of dynamic shifts and changes, and within my family having to, figure out who took on those roles, and who was going to, take over the things that my mom had done. And she did so much for all of us, and as well for my dad. She did everything. My dad, always went to work, and he's the first to admit that was kind of useless at anything domestic or in the kitchen, or, and
Yeah.
he had to learn all of those things and start taking on that responsibility. So it's really hard to see someone who is always so capable then not be capable and just everything done for them. Yeah, you kind of see pieces of them being lost and over long periods of time, and you constantly mourning
Yeah.
every time they aren't able to do something, or like a function of theirs is no longer, what it used to be.
Mhm. Were there any sort of early signs that you recognized in terms of those changes for your mum, whether that be in what she could, handle physically or her emotional state? Can you look back and think, oh, that's the exact time that things started to change?
Yeah, definitely. She was diagnosed in June 2011, but I think we can look back probably at least 2 years and maybe even more, but specifically 2 years from then, prior to her diagnosis, where lots of little things happened and lots of changes were happening. But at the time, we didn't associate that with Alzheimer's. It wasn't something that was on our radar because of her age, because we didn't have any family history of Alzheimer's. So when things happened, like her personality changed, she became really withdrawn and detached when we were, in group environments. She would, always be part of the conversation, but she was, she just kind of removed herself from those situations and didn't participate in conversation. And we thought she was maybe depressed. So her personality definitely changed. There were instances where, she lost a car in a car park, and it was different to, how you and I might lose our car and just be like, oh, I'm not sure if I parked on the green or the blue level.
Yeah.
This was like a state of panic and complete, like, absolute utter panic of not knowing at all where she parked, or losing a skirt and not being able to find it and remember where it was, and not being able to rationalize with herself that it's somewhere there. She knows it's there. We saw it a couple of days ago. And panic in those instances. And at the time, we weren't aware what was happening. So we would probably react in a way that made it worse for her.
Yeah.
Things like, my mom was always like the master of the kitchen, and then she was, not so comfortable or doing things wrong in the kitchen. But then if we kind of went to help her in the kitchen, she would get upset because that was her domain. And there were lots of instances where she was just upset about a lot of things, and we didn't really understand why.
Yeah.
So lots of little things over, that kind of 2-year time period, but we just didn't associate it with anything quite like Alzheimer's, and definitely thought that something was going on. She used to do a lot of accounting work for my dad's dental practice, and she could do that, with her eyes closed. She'd been doing it for so long, but now she was just messing it up, and she didn't know what she was doing. And so, we didn't know at the time, but the function of doing those things and sequencing in her brain just wasn't functioning the way it used to be. And we just didn't know that that was what was happening.
Yeah. And so obviously challenges are there and very present for your mum during that experience. But I imagine as well there's challenges for being a carer for someone who's got early onset Alzheimer's, or even just navigating that period where, like you said, you knew something was going on, but perhaps you didn't have the right frame for it yet. What were the biggest challenges for caring for someone with Alzheimer's, especially, in your case where the disease is affecting someone way earlier than you had anticipated?
Yeah, so there's lots of different things, and there's lots of different stages. So the first few years, when after the diagnosis, when my mom was still living at home, and at that point, only my younger brother was at home. My elder brother and I had moved out of home. And so it was just really my dad and my brother. And, they had to deal with everything from lots of different mood swings and changing in moods and personality, to dealing with her often just, crying for no reason, or not being able to cook properly. And so taking on that responsibility. And then, as things progressed, you've got to make sure that they wash themselves correctly and wash their hands and shower properly, and have they brush their teeth. So you kind of, in a sense, like the person regresses to somewhat of a toddler, where you have to help them toilet and help them brush their teeth and help them shower. So you're taking on that responsibility. And then there's the idea that you don't want to leave them at home alone, because what if they turn the tap on and forget to turn it off, and the water runs and the house is flooded, or they turn the stove on and forget to turn it off. There's so many things like that which you have to think about. So now the person can't really be left alone. And then because they can't physically go out and do the normal things like they would have by themselves, you always need someone there looking after them, or taking them to do the shopping, or going for a walk, or needing to be driven to an appointment. So there's that aspect of it. And it definitely does. It takes like a toll on the carer, especially when you're trying to be a family member and a husband and a carer, or a child and a carer. The lines are really blurred, and it becomes like a really complex relationship. And so, we did keep my mom at home for the first few years, but it did get to a point where it just wasn't healthy, I think, for anyone, for her to be at home. Not for her. She need, as the years went on, and she needed more and more care. And it's probably something that, we had to make a decision. Do we bring a full-time carer into the house and turn, their home into a care facility, basically?
Yeah.
Put her into a home which is, structured and it is built for that, built for people with dementia or disability or illness, where they have the appropriate carers 24/7. And that's a hard decision to make, but it's definitely one where we maybe could have even made it earlier, knowing that she was better off in a home with full-time care, and that it wouldn't have been a good idea to turn their home into a care facility.
Yeah. And I mean, it's not something that you, I imagine, would want to even be considering when someone's in their late 50s, early 60s. That's a time in life where we associate with retiring from work, or starting to, do all the travel that you maybe didn't get to do when you were raising a family. So the idea of looking at, the right nursing home to look
Yeah,
after your mum is so confronting.
absolutely. And I have grandparents now that are in their 90s, and my grandfather's 100, and
Wow.
back then, like we were putting them into an old age home, which made so much sense. But then putting my mom into one was really difficult. And it's exactly that. We talk about it a lot, that my mom, she was robbed of her future. And so was my dad, because as you say, like he had worked so hard his whole life and was, nearing retirement, and they would have just had the means to travel and, do all those things that they had planned to do in their retirement. And that's when their first grandkids were born, and they could have spent all the time with them, just looking after them, and that's something that they always dreamed of doing. And yeah, you just feel like everyone is robbed of that.
Yeah. Where do you find sort of sources of support through all of this, Keri? It sounds like your family is close. Did it stay close during this time? Did you look elsewhere to community organizations or the Jewish community for help?
Yeah, and multiple. So I always say, and I consider myself and my family like really, really lucky that early on we were able to connect with people through the community that had experience with dementia and somewhat were specialists in this area and could really guide us through the process. And I'm very, it's not lost on me that that isn't available as easily to everybody as, it was to us. And that really helped us understand what the journey was going to look like and the type of support that we would need. And same, like I'm really extremely grateful that I do have a family that's close, and it absolutely came with its challenges and still does. And, there was lots of nuances and new ways of navigating things. And there were definitely moments in throughout those years where we were, we butted heads and we disagreed. But the most important thing was that we had this constant communication, and we would make a concerted effort to meet with each other constantly, especially over those first few years where things were changing so much, to make sure that, hey, we were all communicating, like, what did you see happen? How did this person react? Who's upset? That type of thing, who's not being supported, and really talk through these things. And that's so important. So I say, like, communication is absolutely key within your own family. And the place that I probably found externally the most support was through an organization called Chiba, which is the Centre for Healthy Brain Aging, which is run through the University of New South Wales, which is a research facility. And they have an incredible, they've established a credible community of people who have family members, whether it's parents or spouses with dementia. They're a research facility, so they are really looking into like the preventative side of healthy brain aging, but at the same time have cultivated an amazing community. And I've met so many people through there. And I started working with Chiba and being associated with them in 2012. So just as they were actually formed, and just after my mom was diagnosed, and I'm still involved with them today. And that brought me a great sense of community and support network. And yeah, just meeting people who were going through the same thing that I was going through, because you have amazing support from like your other family and friends. But as I think we all know and can appreciate, that it's hard to kind of sometimes talk about these things with people who aren't going through it, because you don't expect other people to understand on that level if you haven't experienced it. So I think it's important, if you are in the situation, is to, find that community or reach out to people that have gone through it, and who, have walked a day in your shoes and can understand. And I've reached out to people randomly that I've, heard about, and vice versa. And I have people reaching out to me. And I think that that's probably something that's really important to do. Just never be afraid to reach out to somebody if you're feeling the need to talk.
Yeah, I mean, they're, I think, really important lessons, and also lessons, I guess, you can apply to all sorts of circumstances where we're dealing with loss and grief. And, regardless of whether it's Alzheimer's specific, I think it's really important, yeah, to build that community.
I
And
think it's, as you say, like, it doesn't matter, whether it's Alzheimer's or it's cancer or it's a disability. Through work, I've worked with people with spinal cord injuries, and seeing the communities that are built around there are so important. And the people that are going through whatever it is they're going through need to gravitate towards those communities, because there's just a different level of understanding that other people just wouldn't have and shouldn't have, because they haven't been through it.
yeah. Keri, just a quick switch of gear, which is, our audience obviously are Jewish Australians, are really interested in this sort of field in arts and culture. And I'm wondering if in any way, did your Jewish identity influence your book as it is now, but also, I guess, the way that you handled this sort of experience and life stage?
Yeah, I definitely, there's lots of instances in which throughout the years, our Jewish cultures and traditions and whatnot played a huge role in that. And I think specifically, I think just the culture and tradition of family, which for me is what I see my Jewish identity is being part of a community, having a culture, having, really strong morals and ethics and a cultural background. And I think just things like, Friday night dinners with your family and Jewish festivals and the importance of keeping those traditions alive, even, during the hardest times of my mom not being well and especially because my mom was the person who, was always the driving force behind, Friday night dinners, and festivals, and she would host Pesach and Rosh Hashanah. And so her not being able to do that could have easily, made it fall by the wayside. So I think ensuring that those traditions were carried on and are still are, today was really important because it was that opportunity to come together and, be together and still celebrate. And you learn that you can experience joy and pain and sadness at the same time. And I think that's a really important lesson, that sometimes while we're going through the toughest of times, there's still some joy that we can experience. And those two feelings are not mutually exclusive. And I think, as certain things happened for me, when my mom did pass away, and my mom passed away on Yom Kippur, on Kol Nidre, like that was a really significant moment. And I say, like, I'm not a very spiritual person, but I do hold like my Jewish tradition and culture and values like very dear. And that was definitely, I don't know, I felt that there was something in there, the type of person she was, who was so kind and always, gave back to the community and did charity work throughout her life. I felt that there was something with on that. And then also I think I found a lot of comfort in our, in the way that we do funerals and burials and sitting shiva. I've obviously, been to funerals before, but it's the first time I've ever sat shiva. And I found a lot of like beautiful comfort in being able to have the opportunity to mourn and not being kind of thrown back into normal life straight away. And it gives you that permission to actually take the time to mourn.
Yeah.
And I think those things, really stood out to me during that time.
And I think that's something that, our entire audience can resonate with, and no matter what age they've lost a loved one. I think sitting shiva is incredibly cathartic for people, and I resonate with that strongly myself. My final question for you, Keri, which you've touched on a little bit around some lessons, but I guess, is there anything that you wish you had known, back 10 years ago when your mum was first diagnosed, or someone in a similar stage? Is there something that you wish you'd known to kind of equip you to manage the journey that would lie ahead?
Yeah, I mean, I think I could sit back and say, I wish I knew these things, but, we're not to know these things. But I think if there is something that I can impart from my experience, is that I think regardless of anyone's situation, like we never really know what other people are going through, right? Like everyone has their own things that are the most important thing to them. But I think the one thing that I learned from this, and I saw throughout this process, like the best of humanity, but I also saw some of, not the greatest forms of humanity.
Yeah.
But I always think like leading with kindness. I think we never really truly know what somebody else is going through, and we don't need to know. Like, it's not for everybody to, be completely open about what's happening in their lives. But I think just being kind to people, and if you see somebody who's struggling or is experiencing a disease or disability or something like that, rather than turning your back on those people, rather just like lean in, because I don't think you can ever say the wrong thing by caring about somebody. And so when you're faced with a situation where, you can actually, turn your back and not want to deal with something because you feel a little bit uncomfortable or awkward, imagine how the other person who is going through something is actually feeling. And so rather just say something and be there, or just be kind, as opposed to, turning your back. And then in terms of like the Alzheimer world and, what I wish I knew then, it's hard. I don't wish I knew more about it then, because I don't wish upon anybody to have to go through, what we did and with a parent at such a young age. But I do think that we can't really ignore the fact that this is something that is quite prevalent, and unfortunately, like, could happen to anyone. It's not hereditary in my family, so it's not something that's only passed on through, your genes. And I think we just need to genuinely and in general be aware of our own health. And I think not to take it so seriously that we don't enjoy life, but I think we have to understand that the things that we do when we're young can really have an impact on us. And there is something to be said about being healthy and looking after yourself if you want to live a long and healthy life.
Yeah. I think they're really great takeaways and a beautiful sentiment to end on. So thank you so much for your time, Keri, and for sharing your story with us so meaningfully. I know that this will resonate so strongly with our readership. So I really appreciate your time.
Very welcome. Thank you.
Thanks, Keri.